Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am Blake Smith, and with me are my partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts. How are y'all doing?
I am ready to do this one. I love Betty and Barney Hill. I am so ready to talk about them.
I know, me too. This is one of my favorite stories in the paranormal and one of the most famous. So I'm real excited to see if you found something that I didn't know.
Well, I'm going to tell you, probably not, because their case is so well documented. And this is one that we have referenced, I can't tell you how many times on this podcast. We say, oh, it's like the Betty and Barney Hill case. And all of our listeners like, if they don't know what the case is. So
we even did like a little mini-sode on it when we were doing our alien documentaries. Yeah,
we did. I covered the documentary, The Alien Abduction, Betty and Barney Hill, as part of that. And so I was like, you know what? Why don't I just tell the whole story? Let's go further into it and let's talk about it.
Hell yeah.
This one is super intriguing. It is the very first case of alien abduction. And there's some wildness to it. And leave it to me, the most non-alien one of the bunch, to be willing to take on such a huge freaking case.
You know what? I told my mom what we were covering, and she was like, oh, what are y'all covering this week? And I said, Blake's doing Barney and Betty Hill. She said, Blake is? I said, yeah. She goes, he's not the alien guy. I said, he's becoming one slowly.
I'm becoming one. This one.
We're dragging you with us to the dark side, whether you want to come or not.
Exactly. This one, and this one just splits my head wide open. I'm not going to lie. So I'm going to jump right into it. We got a lot to get through, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot to discuss tonight. So let's get to it. Well, on the night of September 19th, 1961, the highways of northern New Hampshire were empty and still. A single car cut through the darkness, winding through the south through the White Mountains. Inside were a husband and wife, returning home from a quiet vacation across the Canadian border. They weren't looking for trouble. They weren't chasing anything. They were just trying to get home. But something was watching them. Somewhere near the town of Lancaster, an unusual light appeared in the sky. Too bright, too erratic, and too deliberate. What began as a harmless curiosity soon became something else entirely. The object descended and drew closer, and in the shadow of Indian Head, the road and their lives divided into before and after. When the couple finally reached their house, time no longer made sense. Something had changed. And what followed in the hours, days, and even years to come would become one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. This is the case that reshaped how we talk about missing time, the one that defined what it means to be taken, the one that would become a blueprint for everything that followed. This is the story of Betty and Barney Hill. Now, before their names were ever linked to something unexplainable, Betty and Barney Hill lived a quiet life in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, located on the Atlantic coast. Their days were filled with work, church, and community service. They were involved, respected, and by all outward appearances, unremarkable in the best way possible. Ordinary people with steady jobs and deeply held convictions. But understanding who they were that night is essential, because their reputations would later become the foundation upon which their story stood or fell. Now, Betty Hill, born Eunice Elizabeth Barrett on June 28, 1919, was a lifelong New Englander. Raised in Newton, New Hampshire, she came from a working-class family and grew up surrounded by the values of self-reliance, education, and service to others. She earned her degree from the University of New Hampshire and went on to work as a social worker for the state, a career that placed her on the front lines of domestic crises, economic hardship, and family instability. She was known as smart, assertive, and principled, a woman who believed in fairness and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Although she wasn't immersed in science fiction, Betty held a casual interest in space exploration and astronomy. She enjoyed following NASA's early efforts and occasionally speculated about the possibility of life beyond Earth. But before 1961, that curiosity had never gone beyond idle conversation or abstract thought. She wasn't reading about UFOs, she wasn't attending conferences, and she wasn't part of any fringe communities. Her life was rooted in practical service, social advocacy, and quiet routine. Now, Barney Hill, her husband of just over a year at the time of the incident, came from an entirely different background. Born on July 20th, 1922 in Newport News, Virginia, Barney had spent most of his early life navigating the deeply segregated landscape of the American South. After serving honorably in World War II, he moved north in search of greater opportunity and stability. He eventually settled in New Hampshire and took a job with the United States Postal Service, where he built a reputation as a reliable and dedicated worker. Where Betty was expressive and idealistic, Barney was reserved and deeply rational. He didn't indulge in speculation, and according to those who knew him, he approached life with a cautious, measured perspective. He was skeptical by nature, someone who preferred facts over feelings and order over imagination. That grounded nature made him a reluctant participant in anything that couldn't be clearly explained. Now, like Betty, Barney also believed in service, but his focus was civil rights. He was active in the NAACP and served on a local advisory board for the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Despite the scrutiny that came with being in an interracial marriage in 1960s America, he faced it with dignity, conviction, and quiet determination. His life was a balancing act between being seen and not being targeted, and he managed it with remarkable grace. Now, together, Betty and Barney Hill were a study in contrast and compatibility. She brought passion and curiosity. He brought order and restraint. But what they shared, far more than what set them apart, was a deep commitment to justice, an unshakable belief in truth, and a quiet confidence in their place in the world. And that's what made their eventual claims so difficult to dismiss. They were not fringe believers, attention seekers, or eccentrics. They were thoughtful, measured, and credible. Two people who, by all accounts, had never been asked to believe. But by the time of their encounter in 1961, Betty and Barney Hill had been married for just over a year. Their union was legal in New Hampshire, but that didn't shield them from the realities of a country still deeply divided along racial lines. Interracial marriage remained illegal in more than 20 states across the United States, and even where it was permitted, it was rarely accepted. For Betty and Barney, marriage required more than love. It demanded resolve, discretion, and an unspoken understanding that simply existing together in public could be an act of quiet defiance. They lived modestly in Portsmouth, away from the spotlight. They worked and they kept to themselves, and they moved through the world carefully, not out of fear, but because they understood that scrutiny came with the territory. Every handshake, every sideways glance, every shift in tone from a neighbor or stranger reminded them that their relationship to some was still a provocation. And yet their marriage was strong and steady, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a daily commitment to protect each other in ways that didn't always require words. And when the incident occurred, their first instinct was to keep it private. There wasn't going to be a public announcement, no media campaign, and definitely no press conference. They told only a few trusted friends, unsure themselves of what they had experienced. In the weeks that followed, as physical symptoms emerged and psychological strain began to build, they sought help, not publicity. Their interest was in understanding what had happened, not in convincing anyone else that it did. Their decision to come forward was not taken lightly. Barney, in particular, feared what it could mean for his job, his reputation, and his position within the civil rights community. A Black man making claims of being abducted by non-human beings risked not only ridicule, but being stigmatized, dismissed as unstable or delusional in a society that already viewed him with suspicion. Betty, too, had reason to be cautious. Her job as a state social worker required a level of credibility that could easily be undermined by a story that, to many, sounded absurd. They both understood the cost of being seen as anything other than ordinary. And yet, as the pressure mounted, they made the decision to tell the truth as they understood it. And what emerged wasn't a cry for attention. It was a reluctant confession from two people who had spent their lives doing everything right, only to find themselves at the center of something that no one could explain. And for a couple who had always lived just outside the margins of social acceptance, the risk of speaking out wasn't theoretical. It was personal. I think that's what I love about their story. I'm going to stop right here, is that these two had everything to lose.
Yes, they did.
They gained absolutely nothing from coming forward. We've talked so many times about government positions and people with credibility. And then you add on top of that, in 1960s, they are also an interracial couple.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely had nothing to gain from this.
And they would have been best served to do just what they were doing. Stay down, keep their head low, do their jobs, and not cause any waves. And by speaking out, they are going to get unwanted attention, you know. But I think that's what gives them so much credibility to me. Right.
The spotlight was the last thing that they wanted, period. You know, and
And we'll I'll dive more into it because I actually read a lot from Kathleen Martin, their niece.
Yeah.
On which, because I talk about her a little bit later on, but I'll actually talk about the family's involvement whenever they do come forward. But that's what makes this case just drip with credibility for me.
Right.
All this stuff just stacked up against them for coming forward.
Right.
So, well, the night that changed everything for Betty and Barney Hill began like any other, quiet, uneventful, and entirely ordinary. There were no signs that what lay ahead would fracture time, memory, and logic. Only the open road, the comfort of routine, and the expectation of home waiting at the end of the drive. On the evening of September 19th, 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were making their way home from a 3-day vacation through Canada. The trip had been spontaneous, a brief escape meant to give them a break from the demands of work and social obligations. They had visited Niagara Falls, driven through Montreal, and were now heading south, back to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The plan was to travel through the night and arrive before dawn, avoiding heavy traffic and making the most of the clear moonlit conditions. At approximately 10:15 p.m., they crossed into the United States near Colebrook, New Hampshire, and continued down U.S. Route 3, a 2-lane highway that wound through the quiet mountainous terrain of the White Mountains. The night was uneventful at first. The air was cool, the sky was clear, and the only light around them came from the moon and the occasional clusters of stars scattered across the darkness. Betty sat on the passenger side, gazing upward through the windshield. Somewhere near Lancaster, there was a strange point of light moving across the sky. At first, they assumed it was a star or possibly a satellite. Just years earlier, the Soviet Union had launched Sputnik, and the notion of man-made objects orbiting the Earth was still relatively new to the public. She watched it for a few moments, expecting it to behave like any celestial body would, gliding smoothly and steadily across the sky. But this object didn't follow that pattern. It seemed to be moving erratically, changing direction in sudden sharp angles. It ascended and descended. It appeared to hover and then shoot off again. And she mentioned it to Barney, who remained focused on the road. He dismissed it at first, believing it was likely just a plane or a trick of perspective caused by the car's motion. Betty was not convinced.
Yes, hard right angles and ascension and descension are a trick of the car. Sure, Barney.
You got to remember, this is a rational man.
I understand being rational. I'm a rational man, but if I see some shit like that, my butthole's going to pucker. I'm not going to lie to you.
Can't say that when I'm taking a drink, man. Well, as the minutes passed, the object remained visible, and its behavior grew more unusual. Betty became increasingly unsettled. Somewhere near Twin Mountain, she asked Barney to pull over so she could get a better look. They stopped the car, and Betty retrieved a pair of binoculars from the trunk. Through the lens, she could see its movement was more deliberate. She would later describe it as resembling a, quote, spinning pancake. Well, Barney still wasn't ready to abandon all rational explanation. He suggested it might be a commercial aircraft en route to Montreal, or perhaps a military reconnaissance plane. But even as he spoke, the object seemed to contradict his reasoning. It was closing the distance between itself and their car, sometimes darting behind trees or slipping across the sky in seconds. It didn't behave like anything either of them had seen before, and it descended towards them rather quickly. And Barney became very uncomfortable and told Betty that they would continue their drive, and to pay it no mind, as he assumed it just had to be a commercial airplane. Well, despite Barney's skepticism, they continued driving, but the object appeared to be stalking them. It would vanish from view behind the mountains, only to reappear seconds later in a new position, often closer than before. It would zigzag and bounce back and forth in the sky like a ping pong ball, frightening Barney. However, Barney assumed now it must be military pilots playing a game with them. He actually, and I didn't put this in there, but he actually says later on in an interview that he believed that when they stopped and opened the doors, the dome light on the car pulled the attention to them from up there. And that's what he thought was military pilots playing a game with them because they now spotted them.
No, and then, I don't know, man, but there's so many stories, too, where someone turns a light on and that draws the attention of whatever it is that's stalking them. And I bet he wished he hadn't stopped and opened that damn door now.
Make them a beacon.
Yeah. Well, as they approached Cannon Mountain and the area near Franconia Notch, the hills' unease deepened. The road grew narrower, winding between steep rock walls and dense forest. There were no streetlights, no passing cars, and no signs of civilization for miles. Just the sound of tires on pavement and the growing sense that something was stalking them in the sky. It followed the couple for roughly 30 miles. By the time they reached Indian Head Resort, a well-known local landmark, the object had drawn dangerously close. And that's where everything changed. As the couple drove through the White Mountains under a darkening sky, the object that had been trailing them began to move with greater urgency. According to both Betty and Barney, it descended from above a ridge and crossed directly in front of them, hovering low over the highway in incomplete silence. There was no flashing aviation lights, no engine sounds, just a massive disc-shaped craft suspended in the air that was now blocking their route. Barney stopped the car immediately and stepped out. Despite being unnerved, he walked into an adjacent field with a pair of binoculars in hand, determined to get a better look. He actually said, I either need to figure this thing out or figure out what it wants. Those were his later words.
No, you don't. Keep driving.
Well, he estimated the object hovered no more than 100 feet off the ground and about the same distance away from him laterally. It was massive, disc-shaped, and metallic, unlike anything he'd seen before. As he looked through the binoculars, that's when he saw them. Barney saw a row of figures through a window in the craft, or a set of windows in the craft. They were there, just staring at him. Between 9 and 11 humanoid entities, each wearing what looked like shiny black uniforms. Their skin appeared gray in tone, smooth and hairless. But what unsettled him most were their eyes, large, dark, and curved to the side of their head. Then something changed. Yeah, so he said that they kind of curved around almost. He said at one point it almost looked like they wrapped around their skulls. But, yeah. But then something changed. All of the figures, save for one, abruptly moved away from the window. Barney saw them turn and began pulling levers or touching instruments on the inside. 2 red lights extended from the sides of the craft on rod-like structures, almost like mechanical wings. Something began to emerge from underneath, a ramp or a ladder, slowly descending. It gave the distinct impression that someone or something was about to emerge. And in that moment, instinct overwhelmed Barney. Barney tore the binoculars away from his face, sprinted back to the car. He was yelling before he even reached the door, "They're going to capture us." The panic in his voice was unlike anything Betty had ever heard from him. He jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and floored the accelerator. They were now fleeing, barreling down the dark road with no clear idea of where to go. And Barney was frantic. He demanded that Betty look out the window to see if the object was still following them. She leaned toward the passenger side window, scanned the trees, but saw nothing. Just as she finished rolling the window back up, a strange noise began to fill the car. It sounded like a series of electronic beeps, mechanical and rhythmic, like a metallic tuning fork reverberating through the vehicle. A tingling sensation overcame both of them, not unlike a mild electric current pulsing beneath the skin. And then everything went quiet. They would later describe this moment as dreamlike, as if they were no longer fully present. Time seemed to stop. Their surroundings faded. It was as though they were suspended in a state outside of consciousness, neither asleep nor awake, yet still aware that something was happening. Then, just as suddenly as the experience began, a second series of beeps brought them back. The fog lifted and the sensation ended. When they regained full awareness, the couple now found themselves 35 miles further south on the same highway, with no recollection of the drive that had just occurred. Neither could explain how they had gotten there or why it felt as only though minutes had passed. The road ahead was quiet and the sky was lightening, and they were completely disoriented.
Now, I know this is the first abduction. Is this the first case of missing time that we know of that is associated with UFOs as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. This is basically the first one that talks about missing time.
Okay.
So, despite what had transpired, Barney remained defiant. He insisted to Betty that it couldn't have been a flying saucer. But even as he said the words, his voice betrayed doubt. He gripped the wheel, unwilling to discuss it further. Betty tried to make sense of what had happened, but Barney kept the conversation minimal. Their drive to Portsmouth continued in near silence, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the quiet confusion that now sat between them. And by the time they pulled into their driveway, the sun had started to rise. The encounter had lasted hours, but neither of them could explain why. What had begun as an ordinary drive through the mountains had ended with a blank stretch of memory, physical sensations neither of them understood, and a silent realization that something extraordinary had just taken place, though neither could say exactly what that was. When they finally arrived home in Portsmouth, the world around them had returned to normal. The neighbors were beginning the day as the sun rose, but for Betty and Barney Hill, something was off. More than exhaustion, more than just the weariness of a long drive, their bodies felt foreign. Both described feeling grimy, unclean, as though they had been exposed to something more than just roadside dust or mountain air. The sensation lingered beneath their skin, a kind of inner discomfort that neither of them could fully articulate. But despite this, they went to bed for a few hours. And inside their home after they woke, they went about their routines almost automatically. But subtle signs began to reveal themselves and the emotional toll of the night. Betty glanced at the dress she had been wearing the previous night. It was new, only worn once or twice, but something felt tainted about it. The zipper and lining at the hem had been torn. She had also noticed a pink powdery substance and discoloration on the dress. She had no memory of how it had happened. For a brief moment, she considered throwing it in the trash, but something stopped her. Instead, she tucked it away in the closet, never to be worn again. Barney's shoes showed signs of stress as well. The tops of the dress shoes he had been wearing had been scraped as if he'd been dragged or scuffed along a rough surface. He had no explanation for the damage. Both of their watches, which had been functioning normally before the trip, had stopped sometime during the night and never worked again. And also, the strap on his binoculars were broken. Now, of course, that could be from the panic of running back to the car.
Probably.
I'm sure I probably would have just dropped the bastards on the ground.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'd be like, screw this, let's go.
And I do like how he's still like, no, this didn't happen. We didn't see. Dude, you saw something land in front of you. Like, I understand that, when you have the logical person who is as logical as Barney Hill freaking out, I understand that maybe he is trying to rationalize it himself, and he's trying to tell himself that it didn't happen. He's trying to convince himself. He's not trying to convince Betty, because Betty knows it happened. And he knows it too.
Yeah.
But, dude, you had something happen to you. Don't try to poo-poo it away. Like, just go with it.
Well, these little details, the dress, the shoes, the watches, stacked together to form a quiet, gnawing question neither of them dared say aloud. What really happened to them? In the hours that followed, their emotional states began to diverge. Betty was deeply unsettled, but very curious. She wanted to understand and felt something had been done to them, something invasive. She needed to make sense of it. Barney, on the other hand, was kind of slightly beginning to unravel. He grew a little bit withdrawn, distant. His instinct was just completely bury it, to lock the entire night away and pretend it never had happened. He actually told Betty, he was like, don't go looking to this. No good will ever come of it. Still, there was no denying that something extraordinary had occurred. The missing time, the sensations, and the lingering unease. They were back in the safety of their own home, but it no longer felt like a return to normal. The world hadn't changed, but something inside them had, and neither of them knew how to put this into words. And in the days following the encounter, the atmosphere in the Hill household remained heavy. Betty couldn't shake the feeling that they had been exposed to something unknown, something that had physically or perhaps even chemically altered them. That quiet tension only deepened when, despite Barney's request not to share their experience, Betty spoke with her sister and mentioned the strange sensations that they had experienced in the car. Now, Betty knew her sister's neighbor was a physicist. So her sister shared the story with that neighbor, who offered a very curious suggestion. He told the Hills to take a compass and hold it near and over the car. If the object had left any trace, he said, it might reveal itself magnetically. Well, the Hills took the advice. And what they found would become one of the most tangible pieces of evidence tied to their story. On the surface of the car's trunk, they noticed something they hadn't seen before. A series of smooth, circular spots about the size of silver dollars, clustered together in no particular pattern. They matched the color of the car's finish, but the surface of the spots appeared highly polished, glossier than the surrounding paint, almost as if the metal had been subtly altered. They counted the spots, between 15 and 20, each one near a perfect circle, or a near perfect circle. No residue, no charring, no apparent heat damage, just perfectly smooth anomalies that hadn't been there the night before in the mountains. And when the Hills held the compass to these spots, the needle began to spin, slowly at first, then increasing intensity. They moved the compass a few inches away, and it immediately returned to normal. Back over the spot, it spun again. Now, to someone unfamiliar with compasses, this might not have meant much, but Barney had a background in practical mechanics and an intuitive understanding of how things should work. He did note that maybe a car battery might pull a compass needle slightly, but it wouldn't cause it to spin wildly.
Not at all.
These were not the effects of a minor electromagnetic field. Something else was at work. And the discovery added a new layer of unease. This wasn't just a strange dream or a shared delusion anymore. There was something physical, something measurable now attached to their experience. And it wasn't proof, not in a scientific sense, but it was real. They could see it, touch it, and test it.
Which is exactly what his logical mind needed.
Exactly. And it left them with an even more urgent question. If the craft hadn't left its mark only on their minds and bodies, what else had it done? Now, the strange spots on the car and the unshakable sense of contamination were enough to push Betty and Barney beyond their initial hesitation. Something had happened to them, and they couldn't ignore it. And while Barney still leaned towards silence, Betty began reaching out, unsure of where to turn, but unwilling to let it rest. After speaking with her sister again, word spread to a trusted friend of the family, a retired chief of police from Newton, New Hampshire, who happened to be visiting Betty's sister when she called. His advice was very clear. Report it. Not to local law enforcement, but to the military. Pease Air Force Base, he said, was the appropriate channel. Now, at the time, Pease Air Force Base was no ordinary installation. It housed part of the Strategic Air Command, and with that, nuclear weapons. Security and airspace monitoring were among its top priorities. If something unidentified had entered the region's airspace that night, they needed to know. Not only that, but the Air Force Base had told local law enforcement that if anyone had seen anything strange, they needed to hear about it. That was interesting to me.
Yeah.
That the military base puts out basically an all points bulletin on if anybody sees anything strange. And this is not just to the Portsmouth, New Hampshire. This is all surrounding police departments are told this.
Yeah.
If anybody sees anything strange, we need to hear about it.
Right. And we know from other UFO cases, because this being the first one, maybe the military is not who you need to contact, because that could end up bad for you.
Well, actually, hear me out. I mean, yes and no in this case.
Yeah. In their case, a little bit different, but
a little bit different. I
other
did find
cases.
an interesting fact that in 1961, the Pease Air Force Base, like I said, was housing part of the Strategic Air Command, and with it, some bombers and some nuclear weapons. And I think it was just less than maybe 11 or 12 years prior to that, another place that part of the Strategic Air Command was being housed back in 1947. Does anybody want to take a guess?
Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Or, no, sorry, not Wright-Patterson. That's where it was taken. In Roswell, New Mexico.
There you go.
Yes.
In Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. So, shocker. Anyway.
Oh, yeah, I know. Isn't it weird how where the Strategic Air Command shows up, these UFOs seem to pop up?
Ain't it strange? Well, Betty made the call herself. She had her and Barney had contacts at the base and was able to reach someone directly. Now, at first, the response was lukewarm, standard procedure, polite, but dismissive. That changed, though, the moment she described the red lights on the rod-like extensions that came out from the craft. The person on the line went silent for a moment, then asked her to repeat that detail. And by the very next day, Captain Paul Henderson contacted the Hills personally and directly and asked for a full report. Now, both Betty and Barney were surprised, not just how quickly the military followed up, but how seriously their account actually was taken. Barney had expected skepticism, perhaps even ridicule. Instead, the officer who spoke with them listened without judgment, took detailed notes, and asked focused, specific questions. Barney later admitted it did give him the confidence that reporting the event had been the right thing to do. And then came the most startling revelation to them of all. The Hills were actually informed that their story aligned with another report received that night. At exactly 2:14 a.m., air traffic controller at Pease Air Force Base had tracked an unidentified craft moving through the region. It was brief, unconfirmed, and unexplained, but it was logged. In the quiet of their living room, surrounded by Betty's notes and the echoes of the strange night, the implications began to settle in. It wasn't just their imagination. It wasn't just trauma or a shared delusion. Somewhere in official records, radar data had silently affirmed their timeline. The government wouldn't speculate on what they saw, and no conclusions were offered, but something had happened. And now someone else knew it too. I thought that was interesting that they did have radar confirmed.
Yeah.
Night.
Yeah.
But we're gonna get into a couple. We're gonna get into a couple other things that were dismissed about that night.
Right. I just do like we saw something. We're not gonna tell you what it is, but there was something out there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, roughly 10 days after the encounter, things changed for Betty. She began to have dreams. It started without warning. Vivid, unsettling visions that came in the early hours of the morning just before waking. They returned night after night, always the same, unfolding like fragments of a memory that refused to stay buried. The dreams lasted for 5 consecutive nights, each one painting a detailed sequence of events that she could neither verify nor forget. In them, Betty and Barney were stopped along a remote stretch of road. Humanoid figures surrounded their car, wordless and coordinated. She saw herself and Barney being led into the woods, separated from each other, and taken aboard a craft. There, under harsh lighting and in rooms that seemed cold and clinical, Betty underwent a series of strange medical procedures. Her skin, hands, and feet were examined. Something was inserted into her navel. She said she felt like a specimen, handled, observed, but not harmed. Even in her dreams, Betty's mind resisted what was happening. She fought back, tried to flee, questioned the entities, but the scenes always ended the same. Examination, compliance, confusion, then release. By the end of the 5th night, the dreams stopped as suddenly as they had begun. Betty was left deeply disturbed, but intellectually curious. Now, as a social worker, she was trained to recognize the mind's defenses, how trauma and memory could become entangled with imagination. Still, the consistency and clarity of these dreams felt different. She actually wrote everything down, and this is one of the drawings from her dreams of the UFO. She wrote everything down by hand, then later typed them into a formal record, after her supervisor suggested they might reflect more than unconscious processing. The idea took root. What if the dreams were not fiction, but fragments of lost time? And this spurred Betty on to get more information, so she began to research. She sought out books, articles, anything that might help her understand what had happened. And in her search, she came across The Flying Saucer Conspiracy by Donald Keogh, a retired Marine Corps major and one of the most prominent UFO researchers of the era. Now, Keogh was known for taking a serious, almost militant stance on the issue. He didn't treat it as fantasy. He treated it as fact, wrapped in secrecy. And Betty devoured the book. It echoed parts of her own experience and it gave her a new avenue to pursue. So, she wrote to Keogh directly, describing what she and Barney had seen and experienced. And her letter didn't go unnoticed. Now, Keogh was a leading figure and co-founder of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, a civilian-run organization dedicated to scientific investigation of UFO reports. And NICAP took her correspondence seriously.
Mm-hmm.
In the background, Barney remained hesitant. He found Betty's dreams troubling and invasive. He had no desire to see their private experience dragged into public scrutiny, but Betty wasn't content to leave it alone. Something had happened, she was sure of it, and if no one else was going to investigate it, she had made up her mind she would. Now, these early efforts marked the beginning of what would become a years-long search for truth. And for Betty, it wasn't just about finding truth or proof, it was about reclaiming that memory that they had lost. If something had been taken from them in the silence between those two sets of beeps, then she intended to get it back. And for a while, the missing hours remained a vague disturbance, noticeable, but not yet measured. And it wasn't until later in discussions with investigators that Betty and Barney came to fully understand the time that had vanished. Now, I will tell you, stop right here because I didn't put this in my notes. They assumed the only time that was missing was the 35 miles they drove. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They had never really put their timeline together until they spoke to the NICAP investigators, which we're talking about now. So they're assuming going the speed that they're going, okay, we may have 35, 40 minutes missing.
Right.
You know. Now, on paper, their trip from Colebrook to Portsmouth should have taken no more than 4 hours. They had left a diner around 10:15. Factoring in the winding mountain roads and the few moments they'd stopped along the way, they should have arrived home around 2:30 in the morning at the latest. They didn't walk through their front door until 5 a.m. That's 2.5 hours. Well, when the discrepancy was pointed out to them, likely by those NICAP investigators probing their timeline, it landed like a cold shock. They had lost roughly 2 hours. Not to sleep, not to scenic detours, to something unaccounted for. And neither of them could still fill in the blanks. They did remember the beeping sounds, the odd sensation, and the moment they regained the awareness 35 miles further south. But what happened in between remained sealed off. It's basically like their minds had drawn a curtain across it. So the realization deepened the psychological weight of the encounter, especially for Barney. His physical symptoms began to escalate. He developed stomach ulcers that worsened over the next couple of months. He suffered from insomnia, headaches, and a growing sense of unease that clung to him even in daylight. His normally composed demeanor began to crack. Barney still resisted the idea that they had been abducted. He didn't want to be seen as delusional, especially since his role as a public servant. But his body was bearing the cost of repression. And as the silence around the event deepened, so did the toll it took on him. For Betty, the missing time only sharpened her conviction that they had been part of something extraordinary. And for Barney, it was a wound that wouldn't heal. Well, by early October, word of the Hills' strange encounter had reached the desks at the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, and they responded swiftly. Within days, they dispatched one of their most trusted investigators to Portsmouth, astronomer and lecturer Walter Webb. Now, Webb conducted a detailed in-person interview with the Hills that lasted more than 6 hours. He separated them for part of the session, testing for consistency, and the results were striking. Without the benefit of preparation or coaching, Betty and Barney's accounts aligned almost point for point. The appearance of the craft, its behavior in the sky, the presence of figures inside the window, and the sequence of strange sensations that followed the beeping sounds. Webb noted that neither of them seemed prone to fantasy. They didn't seek publicity, he noted. They weren't dramatizing what had happened. If anything, they appeared burdened by the story rather than empowered by it. What they wanted most was to make sense of it, and that desire came through in their cautious, measured retelling. Those are all basically kind of his summary of his interview with them. While Webb didn't draw any definitive conclusions about the nature of the event, his final report leaned heavily on credibility. He called them, quote, honest and mentally sound. He acknowledged that they were clearly affected by something they couldn't explain and that they had nothing to gain from fabricating their story. Perhaps most importantly, Webb noted that Barney, still deeply skeptical of the alien explanation, was the more revealing of the two. For Webb, that detail gave the story weight. If the more skeptical witness was the one with the more vivid memories that included strange beeps and beings peering at him from inside a hovering craft, then something about this case stood apart from the usual noise. Well, Webb's report wouldn't make headlines, though. Not yet. But it was the first serious evaluation of the Hills' experience, and it would lay the groundwork for everything that came next. Now, Barney had done his best to contain it all in. The memories he couldn't reach, the unease he couldn't explain, and the weight of a story he still struggled to believe. But silence was no longer working for him. The pressure had been building for months, and eventually something had to give. So at Betty's urging, he agreed to see a psychiatrist. It was a very practical decision for him. He wasn't looking for validation, just relief. Some way to understand why fragments of that night continued to surface in flashes, why he couldn't sleep, and why the sense of dread just wouldn't lift. And the psychiatrist listened, and then, after several sessions, made a recommendation that would change everything. He referred Barney to Dr. Benjamin Simon, a respected neurologist and psychiatrist in Boston known for his work with soldiers returning from World War II, suffering from war neurosis, or what is now PTSD. Dr. Simon had used deep trance hypnosis to treat severe trauma, particularly cases involving memory loss, combat stress, and repression. If anyone could help Barney unlock what he couldn't quite reach, it was him. What neither Barney nor Betty fully realized at the time was that this referral would set in motion a process that would bring to light not only what they had forgotten, but also a narrative that would ripple far beyond their own lives. I will tell you, before I go into this part, because we're going to get into the hypnosis session of theirs.
Yeah.
You can actually go listen to their entire hypnosis tapes.
It's terrifying, dude.
They're very terrifying. They're very traumatic, dramatic.
They're hard to listen to. You can hear this man's pain.
Well, his and hers.
Hers.
Yeah.
His stuck with me a little more, though. I don't know why his bothered me way more than hers did. Just this very calm man is basically pleading for them to stop in his hypnosis. I just got completely chill bumped up just even thinking about it, because his voice actually will just echo in your ears, and it's very difficult to listen to. I highly recommend you go listen to it, though.
The screaming is
yeah. Well, when Betty and Barney Hill were referred to him in late 1963, Dr. Simon approached their case with the same clinical detachment he brought to every other. He was skeptical, not of their sincerity, but of the supernatural explanation. From the outset, he assumed that any memory gaps or disturbing sensations could be traced to psychological trauma. The idea of alien abduction wasn't on the table. He met them separately at first, listening to their accounts in full. What he observed was a contrast between two very different people. Betty, eager to explore the experience, and Barney, cautious, withdrawn, and deeply conflicted. Dr. Simon believed that if anything had happened, it had left a powerful emotional imprint. But before he could determine what that was, he needed to bypass the conscious mind entirely. His plan was straightforward. Interview each of them under deep hypnosis, independently and without cross-contamination. If their stories matched, they would have to do so independently, without influence. By keeping their sessions separate, he could determine whether their memories aligned naturally, or if suggestion had already shaped their recollections. The results would not only surprise him, but they would also redefine how the world understood alien abduction. The first hypnosis session began in early 1963. I do realize I'm about to put a picture of both of them together under hypnosis. This is from a later session, even though I just said he did it separately. This is just to give you kind of what it looked like. Dr. Simon worked carefully, methodically, in placing each of them into a deep trance one at a time. He started with Barney. From the outset, Barney's sessions were marked by extreme psychological distress. As Dr. Simon guided him back to the night of the encounter, Barney's calm demeanor began to unravel. He recalled standing in the road near Indian Head, binoculars in hand, staring up at the hovering craft. But when Dr. Simon pressed him beyond that moment, something broke loose. Barney whimpered and then cried. His voice trembled as he described a presence inside his mind. One of the figures in the craft, he claimed, was speaking to him, not aloud, but directly into his thoughts. Quote, "Stay there and keep looking," the voice had said. "Just keep looking." Barney begged Dr. Simon not to make him go further. "Please, doctor, don't let me remember that," he pleaded. But under hypnosis, the memory surfaced anyway. He described the frantic return to the car, the shouting, the sudden burst of acceleration as he tried to outrun something he no longer believed was from this world. Then the beeping sounds, first outside the car, then filling the space around them, the tingling sensation that overtook his body, and when reality faded. And when it returned, they were 35 miles further down the road. For the first session, that was all. In a later session, Barney recalled something new. A sharp turn off the highway, down a dirt road lined with tall trees. In the clearing, he saw a fiery, glowing orb. Then figures again, same as before, standing in the middle of the road. And they approached the car. He couldn't run, he couldn't scream, and he knew that there was no escape. He was led by the group of humanoids to the craft. Inside the craft, Barney was led into a room, undressed, and placed on a table. He described a medical examination, though he kept his eyes closed through most of it. He said something was inserted into his rectum, though it didn't hurt, and a cup-like disc was placed over his genitals, and a sperm sample was taken. Through it all, he remained motionless, unable or unwilling to open his eyes. It was clear through his sessions that they were on a, quote, mission, or there was a mission for these figures. And that was all that he could get from, I mean, trust me, there are long hypnosis sessions, but that's about the summary of them. I'd play them all for y'all, but we're going to be here for hours.
Right.
Yeah. And it really is, like you said, it's so hard to listen to. Like, it's downright damn scary to listen to what happened to these people.
Yeah. Well, next, Dr. Simon turned to Betty Hill. Betty's sessions told a parallel story. She, too, remembered the craft blocking the road, the sharp turn, and the men in the woods. But unlike Barney, she said she wasn't afraid until she saw them up close. Frightened, Betty said she tried to run from the car into the woods, but was intercepted by one of the beings. Then nothing. Darkness. Her next memory was being led into the craft. The interior was clinical and quiet. The beings didn't speak out loud, but she could understand them. They told her there was nothing to fear and that they only needed to perform a few simple tests. So Betty was separated from Barney and taken into another room. Almost instinctively, she kicked one of the beings, which is what caused the tearing of her lining of her dress in the process. I would too. Sucker punch one of them. Get off me.
You ain't taking me nowhere, you little bastard.
But back under their control and inside the room, the beings unzipped her dress to the waist, removing it and her shoes, and began a physical exam. They examined her skin, her limbs, and her nervous system. Then a long needle was produced. And the, quote, examiner, as Betty called him, told her it was a simple test and that it wouldn't hurt. And the examiner guided the needle toward her navel. She resisted. She told him that it would hurt, but she was reassured yet again by the examiner that it wouldn't. So the examiner moved the needle closer. When he inserted the needle into her navel, the pain was immediate and intense, and it forced Betty to cry out and beg and plead them to stop. One of the beings, whom she identified as the, quote, leader, placed his hand over her eyes, and the pain stopped instantly, though the soreness still lingered. She said she did not believe they meant harm, but she did not trust them either. Now, in her visions, eventually she and Barney were reunited. Their clothes were returned, their memories blurred. The couple walked back to the car, guided by the beings, first Barney, then Betty. And once the two were back in the car, Barney looked out the window and saw what he thought was a bright moon and chuckled and said, well, there it goes. And Betty looked at Barney and said, well, do you believe in flying saucers now? And Barney forced a laugh and said, oh, Betty, don't be ridiculous. Of course I don't. But under hypnosis, Barney finally admitted what he hadn't said out loud. Quote, I believed that we had seen and been a part of something different than anything I had ever seen before. I think that's about as close as the man got to, yes, I believe this was a flying saucer.
Once again, he's trying to convince himself. Like his whole worldview and everything has just been shattered, and he's trying to convince himself. Of course there's not. Oh, God.
Well, by the end of the sessions, Dr. Simon was left with more questions than answers. The accounts were not only vivid, but uncannily consistent, recalled in isolation with raw emotion and under deep trance. He expected confusion, dreamlike fragments, or contradictions. What he got was a sequence of memories, detailed, chronological, and disturbingly coherent. Whatever had happened to Betty and Barney Hill, it had left its mark far beneath the surface. Well, for nearly 4 years, so his assumption after all that was, he said that about them, that he was kind of disturbed about how like coherent and alike and matched it was. Mm-hmm. But ultimately with the dreams that Betty had, he felt that either consciously or subconsciously, she had imprinted on him with those dreams that she was having. And so therefore it may have been like a shared something between the two.
She had imprinted on Barney.
Yeah.
The information that she had.
With her dreams, yeah.
But that wouldn't necessarily be unusual because they shared the same household. They shared the experience. And who's to say if one wasn't continuing to be contacted? Because now they have a link to both. And why you don't have to contact both anymore. So I can see how that would be likely.
And two,
or at least believably.
Well, the thing is too is if she had imprinted, yes, they're encounter was similar enough, but when they're both separated and they're both being interviewed and put under this hypnotic regression, both of their encounters are similar, but yet entirely different. So I don't know how she imprinted
his examination
exactly onto
her.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah, that's a little weird.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, for nearly 4 years, Betty and Barney Hill kept their story out of the public eye. The hypnosis sessions were now behind them. The memories had surfaced, but the experience was theirs and theirs alone. They had no interest in sensationalism, no desire to turn into a sideshow. But unfortunately, that choice was taken from them. In October 1965, the Boston Traveler ran a 5-part expose that brought the entire abduction account into the public arena. The journalist behind it was John Luttrell, a reporter who had obtained confidential information from someone close to the Hills. According to his own admission, Luttrell allegedly reached out to the Hills in advance. He asked for permission to run the story, and they told him, not no, but hell no. They don't want it told, and we're not ready. Well, he went forward anyway.
Of course.
When questioned later, Luttrell defended the decision as a matter of public interest. He said it was a debate between privacy and the public's right to know. But in the process, he violated the trust of a family who had done everything they could do to maintain their anonymity.
Right.
The leak included not only details of the original encounter, but private aspects of their hypnosis sessions, intimate, vulnerable recollections never meant to be broadcast. The backlash was immediate. Some readers were fascinated, while others were hostile. Accusations of a hoax and delusion poured in. And just like that, Betty and Barney Hill were no longer private citizens. They were the couple who had been first to be abducted by aliens. This 5-part ran for 5 days, and it had the country in a chokehold.
They were glued to it. Yeah.
Yeah. They hadn't sought fame, and they hadn't asked to become the face of a phenomenon. But in the wake of the leak, they were left with a choice. Continue to stay silent and let others shape their story, or take ownership of it and tell it themselves. Reluctantly, they chose the latter. At the urging of their family and a few trusted friends, the Hills began speaking out, publicly, cautiously, and always with the weight of what it might cost. For an interracial couple in 1965 now, in the middle of the civil rights movement, the added scrutiny was dangerous. They were already watched, judged, and now they were being called insane. But there was no turning back. So enter John G. Fuller. Fuller was a well-known author and journalist, respected for his investigative work into unexplained phenomena. Unlike Luttrell, Fuller approached the Hills with care. He didn't want to exploit their story. He wanted to document it thoroughly and on their terms. So with the encouragement of their family and the guidance of Dr. Benjamin Simon, Betty and Barney agreed. The result was The Interrupted Journey, published in 1966. The book presented the Hills' full account for the first time, combining Betty's written recollections, Dr. Simon's hypnosis transcripts, and Barney's testimony. It didn't sensationalize their experience. It laid it out piece by piece, starting with their quiet drive through New Hampshire and ending with the profound psychological aftermath that followed. For readers, the story was both astonishing and deeply human. It was not the tale of wild-eyed fanatics chasing headlines. This was the story of two ordinary people, stable, educated, and deeply involved in their community, who found themselves at the center of something extraordinary. Excuse me. Their interracial marriage, the civil rights activism, their cautious skepticism, all of it stood in contrast to the caricature of a typical UFO believer. And the public took notice. The Interrupted Journey became a national sensation. For the first time, the concept of alien abduction entered the mainstream consciousness. Terms like, quote, missing time, gray aliens, hypnosis recall began to circulate beyond the fringe. And for those who had dismissed the Hills as delusional, the book forced a second look. Then, in 1967, Look magazine reprinted excerpts from the book, bringing the Hills' story into millions of American households. The cultural impact was immediate. The case became a touchstone, referenced in documentaries, scientific debates, and ufology for decades to come. But the price of exposure was steep. The Hills' life changed overnight. Invitations poured in for interviews, panels, and speaking engagement. I think Barney even appeared on To Tell the Truth with his story. You know, that one where they're like, who's the real Barney Hill? Let's find out tonight.
Yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
He appeared on that as well. So they were asked to relive their experience over and over, scrutinized by believer and skeptics alike. Barney, in particular, found the attention emotionally exhausting. His health, already fragile, began to decline further. Betty, ever the fighter, leaned into the public discourse, determined to stand by their truth. They hadn't asked to be icons, but they had become the first widely recognized abductees in modern history, and the world was watching. Now, to put this into perspective for our modern audiences, the Interrupted Journey Look magazine, Betty and Barney Hill, between, I would say, 1965 and 1969, they would have been the worldwide equivalent of Avengers Endgame in our time.
Yeah.
That should give you a scope about how big this is. I know Shelly's not going to get it. Ryan, you get it.
I totally get it. Yeah, it's a huge thing. Like, everyone's talking about it. Everyone is interested. Yeah.
Thing. So to put that into perspective, that's the equivalent from that time in the 1960s with Betty and Barney Hill to what we experienced with Avengers Endgame and how big that was worldwide.
Yeah.
Well, by the late 1960s, the emotional strain of the encounter, the hypnosis revelations, and the relentless public attention had taken a lasting toll on Barney Hill. He had never wanted to be a public figure. Unlike Betty, who found some solace in trying to understand what had happened, Barney struggled deeply with the aftermath. He was a private man, disciplined, rational, and intensely guarded. The idea that something beyond human understanding had touched his life was not something he embraced easily, and the weight of having to explain it to others more than he was more than he had ever bargained for. After the release of The Interrupted Journey in 1966 and the widespread publicity that followed in Look magazine the following year, the Hills found themselves traveling, speaking, constantly being questioned, and it was exhausting. And while Betty pressed forward, attending conferences, giving interviews, defending their story, Barney began to pull back. He had suffered for years with ulcers, high blood pressure, and mounting anxiety. These conditions worsened after the abduction. The trauma had burrowed into his health and had never fully let go. And in 1969, just 8 years after the encounter, Barney Hill died of a cerebral hemorrhage when he was only 46 years old. His death devastated Betty. Whatever else had happened that night in 1961, it had reshaped both their lives. But now, she was alone in telling the story, alone in carrying the weight of what they had experienced. And without Barney, the narrative changed again, not just in tone, but in responsibility. The voice of reason in their partnership was gone. The man who had once screamed, "They're going to capture us," and then tried to forget it, had been silenced. But Betty would go on without Barney, but she would never again have to explain what they had endured to the person who had lived it with her. During one of Betty Hill's hypnosis sessions in 1964, she described being shown something remarkable. While aboard the craft, she had asked the beings where they were from. In response, the leader presented what he called a star map. Some dots were larger than others, and several were connected by solid or broken lines. Betty said the solid lines represented established trade routes, and the broken ones indicated exploratory paths. Now, under the direction of Dr. Simon, Betty sketched the map from memory a few weeks later. The drawing contained 12 prominent stars and 3 background points. And at the time, it was simply another curious detail within an already extraordinary story. But to one woman, it became a puzzle worth solving. Marjorie Fish, a school teacher from Ohio, an amateur astronomer, and a member of Mensa, encountered the map in John Fuller's The Interrupted Journey. Intrigued but skeptical, she believed that if the map was based on a real view of space, it could be reverse engineered and verified. Now, in the early 1970s, long before the age of astronomical modeling, astronomy modeling software, say that 10 times fast, Fish began the painstaking task of building 3-dimensional star models. Using fishing line, beads, and published stellar catalogs, she mapped stars within 54 light years of Earth, accounting for distance, relative position, and spectral type. And over the course of several years, she constructed more than a dozen models. I would get so bored. Kudos to her.
I was gonna say she's literally that meme with Charlie Kelly with the with the red yarn going.
With the red yarn going everywhere. Yep, that's exactly what she is. That is
I'm gonna guess she was single too.
I don't know.
That's an awful lot of time to spend if you got a house and a husband to take care of. At
maybe
the same
her
time.
husband liked to help build star maps with her.
Yeah, maybe he did.
I'm sure he would have taken credit for it.
I mean, listen.
Oh, well, you're right. You're probably right, especially in the '60s. Yeah.
Yes, he probably
Well,
would have
this
said,
is-
"So I'm
this
going to
is-
guess she was single."
Yeah, this is now early 70s now is where we're at now. So, yeah, probably. Eventually, using newly updated star catalog, she found a match. The pattern Betty had drawn resembled a view of space as seen from the Zeta Reticuli system, a binary pair of sun-like stars approximately 39 light years away. The foreground stars, the line connections, even the angle of perspective seemed to align. Zeta Reticuli had not been well known or charted in such detail at the time Betty drew the map, making the match in the eyes of some especially significant. For UFO researchers, it was a bombshell. The map offered a potential origin point and suggested the Hills' experience was not only real, but traceable. However, the story didn't end there. Years later, as new and more precise astronomical data became available, Marjorie Fish revisited her models. Now, according to her obituary, after reevaluating the distances and dynamics of the Zeta Reticuli system, she concluded that the two stars were likely too close together to support stable planetary orbits that could sustain life. And as a result, in keeping with her scientific integrity, she publicly issued a statement retracting her earlier conclusion. She now believed the correlation between the map and Zeta Reticuli was very unlikely.
I did not know that. You found something I didn't know.
I did not know that either. I didn't know she retracted.
Because I traced everybody to the end of their life, and I found her obituary and I read it. You're welcome.
Well, the thing is, too, though, is, and this is what I think, that could have been a ruse from them telling her, hey, this is where we're from, because if what she drew matched up completely with what they found, and there's no known star map at that point except for what she drew, that to me says she saw some sort of star map and drew it. I think maybe they were just telling her they were from Zeta Reticuli, not necessarily them actually being from there.
Yeah, but yes, she retracted it, and that's based on her obituary. Now, I didn't go speak to Marjorie Fish, herself, but because she's passed away.
You didn't throw no dice.
I didn't throw no spirit dice to talk to her, but that is from her obituary that she retracted her statement there, saying that it was very unlikely that the correlation between the map and Zeta Reticuli was accurate. Because I do remember seeing an interview with her. I did watch an interview with her in it, and she basically had said, this was a later time, that there were, she said at a later time, but she also said in her original interview when they asked her about the star map, I know I'm getting a little off script right here, but anyways, there were a few dots in the star map that Betty drew in Zeta Reticuli that she could not actually pinpoint. So I'm guessing when she went to go revisit these later on down the line, when more data was available, possibly in a more modern technological age, she was probably able to confirm whether or not she was right or wrong. And I'm assuming she just figured she was wrong.
But she's a flaw in her thinking. She's saying that it wasn't possible to support life. What should have said life as we know. True. Because that's the flaw in the thinking is she says, oh no, it can't support life. Maybe not human life. But that doesn't mean that whatever it is that zipped through the stars couldn't be supported there. So it's a flaw in that thinking.
No, not necessarily, because I think to be able to sustain life, just life in general, has to be an organic material that is able to sustain on
as we know it to be. Yes.
Right, but if you're going to be an organic material, then you have certain compounds within your makeup that's going to make you quote unquote organic, and to be able to have that process take place, it's a living, breathing being, no matter what it is. In my opinion, they would have to be made of some type of organic material. And to be able to sustain life, you have to be able to sustain organic materials to be able to grow on planets. If you can't sustain life, you therefore can't sustain organic materials. I am not a biologist. I am not an astronomer.
But you're assuming that all life is made up like that.
Or carbon-based.
You're assuming that all life throughout the universe is made up like that. Some may not be. So that's what I'm saying. That's where the flaw is she's saying she should say life as we know it to be.
Yeah. And if it isn't able to support life, that's why I think it could have been a ruse from them telling her this is where we're from, showing her the map, because there have been several abductions since then, and they always like to not always, but a lot of the time like to reference Zeta Reticuli.
Yeah.
So it could be just like something to throw her off. Like, here, we'll show you the star map, and she remembered it, but like we're not actually from Zeta Reticuli. We're from Beetlejuice over here.
I don't,
you know what I mean?
I don't think these aliens are playing whack-a-mole with figure out where we are. You're here. No, we're here. No, stop that. I don't think they do that.
They could be. They could be. But they could be just doing it to throw them off or throw her off.
They're an advanced being. They are, I mean, they only are seen if they want to be seen. Come on now.
I don't know.
So now we got to confuse the bitch we just abducted? No.
There is a trickster element to a lot of these abductions. Absolutely.
They're an advanced being, way smarter than we are.
How
I just don't
know?
think they're going to play like
I don't
let's
know.
confuse her a little bit. No, they have the ability to wipe our minds and that we only remember, what they want us to.
They weren't counting on, but they weren't counting on hypnotic regression therapy. I mean, because there's so many people that have abduction scenarios and these things are put behind walls in their mind, buried so deep.
That's what your brain does to protect itself.
Right, until somebody digs it up somehow or is able to get it out of someone. And a lot of people have, like I said, they've talked about Zeta Reticuli and a lot of these UFOs being, or abduction scenarios talking about them being from Zeta Reticuli. I don't think they're actually from there. I think they're from somewhere else and they're just trying to throw people off. And I think that, showing her a star map, they didn't count on her remembering it. And maybe, with it being dug up and her remembering that star map wasn't something they were counting on. I think it could have been just like showing her to pacify her maybe, or just to.
But what would be the point? You saying aliens are a bunch of lying little bastards?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. I have a hard time jumping to, we're trying to confuse her, because here's the thing. There is no need. There's no need.
I don't
we don't have the technology to come find them. We can't go, find them and go, hey, and put them in jail. We don't have. There's no need to lie.
We don't know what their actual purpose is or where they actually come from. No, I mean we can't go find them. But if they're trying to be confusing on purpose, they could be just telling you.
There's no need.
There's no need, but doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
I just have a hard time thinking we just gonna confuse her and send her home. Get out. I got a hard time with that.
Stranger things have happened, and it's always that. I do think they're lying little bastards, because they're sitting there probing people and telling people, oh, love and light, and you got to change the planet, and blah, 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 blah. All the time, it's always the same message while they're harming people. Not all of them, but you know what I mean, the ones that do. So I do think a lot of them are lying little bastards. Anyway, Blake, continue.
Even so, Marjorie's work had left an indelible mark. The star map had sparked serious interest, inspired scientific inquiry, and provided yet another mystery within the already complex legacy of the Hill case. Whether a coincidence or a glimpse at something more, it reminded believers and skeptics alike that this story continued to challenge the boundaries of possibility. By the mid-1970s, the Betty and Barney Hill case had become the benchmark for alien abduction narratives. It had introduced the concept of missing time, medical examinations by non-human entities, and the recovery of memories through hypnosis. All ideas that would shape the modern framework of abduction lore. But more than just fueling UFO circles, the Hills' story had broken through to the mainstream. That moment of cultural saturation arrived in 1975 with the release of made-for-television film, The UFO Incident. Airing on...
Sorry. Oh,
I know, the pictures of the aliens, I know. Well, airing on NBC, the movie dramatized the Hills' experience from their initial sighting in the White Mountains to their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Benjamin Simon. James Earl Jones portrayed Barney Hill with emotional depth and dignity, capturing the inner conflict of a man who didn't want to believe what his mind was telling him. Estelle Parsons played Betty with a sense of vulnerability and determination. The film was sensitive in its portrayal, opting for psychological realism rather than sensationalism. It focused on trauma, memory, and disbelief rather than alien spectacle. For many Americans, it was the first time they had seen an abduction story treated with seriousness. The film reached millions. It reignited national interest in the case and solidified the Hills as the prototype for what would soon become a genre of its own. The themes explored in the UFO incident, fear, stigma, psychological fragmentation, would appear again and again in later abduction reports. Researchers took note, and so did skeptics. And more quietly, so did countless people who believed they too had experienced something they couldn't explain.
Blake, before you continue, were you able to find a copy and watch it?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, damn.
I think
I
we need
know.
to find a copy.
I need to
Yes.
find a copy. I was not. I tried to.
I wasn't aware that it was James Earl Jones that was in it, and
Yeah.
I'm in for anything he does.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. I was not able to watch that in time. And let me say this: I wasn't able to find a copy that didn't need to be purchased to be able to watch in time. Let me put it
Gotcha.
Got it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So the timing of the film was also significant. Just 6 years earlier, Barney Hill had died. He never lived to see his own story played out on screen or to witness the decades of cultural ripple effects it would cause. But the film helped cement his role in the narrative, preserved his voice, his fear, and his experience. For Betty, the years after Barney's death were marked by growing public engagement. She continued speaking at UFO conferences and events, often sharing her perspective with passion and conviction. She welcomed others who had experienced strange encounters, offering them support and validation. While the world debated what really happened that night in 1961, Betty knew and had already made up her mind. And while the facts of the case would be scrutinized for decades, one thing was certain: their story had changed the conversation. The Betty and Barney Hill case wasn't just an isolated event, it was a cultural inflection point. And with the UFO incident, the story was no longer confined to books and conference rooms. It had now entered the living rooms of America. And years after the counter, Betty's dress, the one she wore the night of the abduction, was tested by a forensic chemist named Phyllis Budinger. She focused on the pink stains that had appeared on the dress, especially around the sleeves and hem, and ran a series of lab tests to figure out what caused them. What she found was surprising. The stains contained proteins and oils that came from living things, but they didn't match what you'd normally expect from sweat or everyday use. It looked like the dress had come into contact with something biological, but it was not from Betty herself. She also found signs of microbial growth. That means the words are hard, which are tiny life forms that feed on moisture, which may have helped explain the unusual discoloration that had developed over time, but not the pink powdery substance. However, when tested, no foreign DNA was found, but the results suggested that Betty's dress really had been handled by someone or something, just as she described during her physical examination on the craft. Even though it didn't prove anything beyond doubt, the analysis gave added weight to Betty's claim that something strange had happened that night. I found that very fascinating. I am a forensics guy. You give me DNA, you give me whatever, show it to me. And they're basically saying in these areas where she said she was grabbed, touched as they were disrobing her, excuse me, that they found proteins and oils that were consistent with something biological, but not from sweat. And it definitely wasn't from Betty.
And it was not foreign DNA, though. Didn't you say that as well?
It's no foreign DNA. Yeah.
So if this was a creature, an alien, let's go ahead and say alien, that grabbed her, there is nothing biologically that matches us if there is no DNA strand, because that's what holds all of our makeup is in those strands of DNA. So if there's no foreign DNA, there's nothing that we could match it to that's in our known genome. Correct?
I believe so.
It's a bit of biological material, but it contains no DNA. That's impossible. That's impossible. If you're a forensics guy, you know this. Sweat, saliva, semen, all of that contains bits of DNA.
Right. Yeah.
So they found a biological substance with no DNA, no foreign DNA. That's the word foreign is what's
no. I think what they're saying.
Here.
I think what they're saying is the phrase in like forensic and stuff with no foreign DNA means basically that no DNA from another organism is present or has been introduced onto this dress.
So the DNA does belong to her, or is there is no DNA at all? That's what I'm trying to figure out. No foreign DNA. That's the words that are hanging me up here.
So we're basically saying that any DNA that was found was 100% native to Betty, but
whatever the substance was foreign.
When I say when it comes to the pink powdery substance, that's where that phrase is being used. The pink powdery substance, there's no foreign DNA. They did not explain further on that. So I'm assuming what they're saying is that the pink powdery substance may have come from something that Betty utilized, used, or something that just got on the dress. She may not even remember it getting on the dress.
Okay.
So what they're saying is that the pink powdery substance, there's no foreign DNA, so it is native to basically this world, this Earth, to Betty herself, to something she could have used or done, something along that lines.
But it is a biological substance of some sort.
No. The biological substance was a substance that was found on the pink stains. Because there's pink stains, then there's pink powdery substance, then there's discoloration. Okay. So pink stains, that's where the proteins and oils came into play that were from living things, but not what you would match from sweat or any of the oils, and not from Betty herself. Okay. The discoloration they attributed to microbial growth and being in the closet.
Right.
And then the pink powdery substance, they're basically saying, we don't know what it is, but there's no foreign DNA here. It is native to here. We don't know what it is, but there's nothing foreign to us.
So that doesn't interest me nearly as much as the biological substance that was found. The biological substance that they got no idea what it is, but it isn't hers. They should be able to type that, get a DNA strand for it if it is of this Earth.
Right.
So there's a biological foreign substance. They got no idea what it is. That's what interests me more. So, okay, I just want to clear it up.
Nope, you're good. You're good. Well, as the decades passed, the story of Betty and Barney Hill remained a cornerstone in the evolving discussion around UFOs and alien contact, and still does. While skeptics debated the possibilities, Betty never once changed her story. She maintained what happened to her and her husband on that September 9, 1961, and that it was real. And looking back at the full scope of the case, it's not hard to understand why it continues to captivate. This was no vague light in the sky. The Hills' experience included physical evidence: a torn dress with inexplicable stains, shoes scuffed as though someone had been dragged, watches that stopped and never ran again. There were the highly polished circular spots on the trunk of their car that made a compass spin uncontrollably, the timeline that didn't add up, an unaccounted for 2-hour gap during a trip they'd made before. These were not just impressions or feelings. These were tangible markers, indicators that something had occurred. Add in another layer with the added weight of the forensic testing on Betty's dress. Though it didn't prove anything outright, it helped confirm the story, or the portion of the story. Then came the psychological aftermath. Barney's ulcers, his growing anxiety, his inability to sleep, Betty's dreams so vivid, so specific, containing details that would later emerge again under hypnosis. Both underwent independent regressions, their testimonies matching not only each other, but details they hadn't consciously discussed. The beings they described, the medical procedures, the star map, all consistent, all under separate hypnosis, all without collusion. Despite all of this, the Hill case, like so many others, was folded into a cultural narrative that quickly turned skeptical. In part, this was strategic. In the decades before and decades following the Hills' encounter, a subtle but powerful effort emerged to undermine the credibility of those who claimed contact with non-human entities. Abductees weren't just doubted, they were ridiculed. They were cast as delusional, attention-seeking, or mentally ill. Government-backed investigations like Project Blue Book dismissed most reports as misidentified aircraft or weather phenomena, while quietly redacting details and altering witness statements. The public was taught to smirk before they listened. But if you strip away the stigma, the Hill case stands on solid ground. It is a story supported not just by memory or belief, but by a confluence of circumstantial, physical, and testimonial evidence. And the uncomfortable truth? People are convicted of crimes every day with far less evidence. A single eyewitness, a few forensic clues, a timeline that doesn't match. A jury can find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt based on that alone. Yet when it comes to cases like Betty and Barney Hills, those same standards vanish. The threshold becomes impossibly high. No longer is it about what happened, but whether it could even happen at all. And that's the lasting tragedy of the Hill case. Not that it's unbelievable, but that it was never given a fair chance to be believed. Betty Hill passed away in 2004, still standing by the events of that night and still committed to sharing her truth. She and Barney are buried beside one another in Kingston, New Hampshire. And their story, even in death, lives on, challenging the silence, daring us to ask harder questions, and reminding us that belief is sometimes the bravest act of all. Their story remains the cornerstone of the alien abduction phenomenon. It opened the door to conversation. It set the template. And whether you believe in flying saucers or not, what happened to Betty and Barney Hill changed the landscape forever. Their case wasn't just the first. It is still the one that matters the most. That is the story of Betty and Barney Hill.
Yeah. Dude, I'm with you on that. I think there's just way too much evidence, especially with the star map and the substance on the dress. I think those are the most damning pieces of evidence for me anyway. And the fact that they had everything to lose by coming forward and telling their story, I think that all adds credibility, and I think that absolutely something happened to them.
100%.
Yeah.
Listen to their interviews.
Mm-hmm.
When you listen to their interviews from the time after it happened until the interviews that Betty was still giving before she passed away,
mm-hmm.
she is so just, I don't even know the right word to even put with it. She's articulate. It's the same details.
She's matter of fact.
Matter of fact, she's not sensationalizing this thing. Oh my God, I ran for the car. It's none of that. She sits down in front of a camera and just basically goes, I'm Betty Hill and I am an experiencer, and tells the story.
She continued to have sightings till the end of her life, did she not?
I didn't go into too much because I was starting to get past my time limit. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that she did too much after that. I'm sure that she had interest in it afterwards, obviously. She went to conferences. She spoke with people. She was a very avid experiencer that toured around and spoke with people.
I believe her dreams, I believe at one point, and then you're going to have to go and find this and dig, but I believe this is correct, that after Barney passed away, a lot of her very vivid dreams stopped. I don't think they ever stopped completely, but there's an interview somewhere, and I don't know why this is sticking in my head, that after Barney passed away, that she had a few intense dreams, and then they basically kind of just declined until the end of her life. But I'm going to tell you, this one in particular, you have two people who, the time that they lived, the circumstances that they were living in, the choices they made in spouse and partner, they were on high alert all the time because they were never safe in their society. Never. Yep. So I 100% believe that they were aware enough to see a strange light suddenly following them. This is something they would have looked for. We were not evolved, and we're not that evolved now, but we were even less evolved in the 60s as to us giving a damn about who loved who.
Yeah.
You know? So these people were on constant alert for their own safety. I believe they would have noticed if they saw something, a light behind them. This would have been a dangerous thing, especially for them to be driving at night. That's also interesting
through the mountains being trailed.
Yeah. Well, but driving at night. So that might have been to keep other eyes off of them. You know, they could travel more, in a little bit more peace. So somebody driving by couldn't see in the car. But they would have noticed this. They stayed on high alert all the time. So they would have noticed if something was near them. Now, the fact that Barney gets out of the car, that is always something I've wondered about, because he gets out of the car, as he puts it, to either find out what it was, or what was it? He said he was going to find out what it was or see what it wanted.
Yeah, I mean, this is at the point where it's sitting in the middle of the highway at this point, and he's basically like, we need to either figure out what it wants or what it is.
Which maybe is how he went through his whole life. I'm sure that he had been pulled over on a stop by corrupt police, or just, hey, who are you? Where he had to get out and either find out what they wanted or find out what was going on. But the fact that they're on a dark road and alone, that's still the one thing is, why does he get out? Maybe he's compelled to. So,
well, I mean, and that's to me, if you're a very rational thinking person and you want to figure out what it is that you're looking at, and you're trying to give it a rational explanation, first thing you're going to have to do is examine it. What am I looking at? I think that the curiosity of it, I want to say, is probably, there's a mixture between curiosity here and a little bit of the alien abduction lore coming into play. Of, he gets out, he needs to see what this thing is to figure it out, and then once he's out and in the field 100 feet away from it, they've already got eyes on him. He's saying, I hear in my head, Just stand there and keep looking as all these levers are being cut and this ramp.
Exactly.
What's to say that once he started walking in that field, they weren't doing something to pull him closer and closer and keep his curiosity spinning in his head.
Right.
Again, and compelling.
That is exactly.
Yeah,
and that is the thing in a lot of these abduction scenarios. People are often compelled to do things that are completely opposite of what they would normally do.
Yeah.
And Barney, being such a rational person, he would have kept fucking driving. He's like, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm going to keep driving. But for him to be compelled to pull over to the side of the road, get out, and I got to figure out what this thing wants.
Think you're close to a light, not knowing what's on the other side.
But here's the thing. You keep forgetting, though. It's not that he didn't pull over when he gets out to go look. Mm-hmm. He had no choice. This thing was blocking their path of travel.
Right.
He had to stop he stopped the car in the middle of the highway. They're both looking at this thing like, what the hell is this thing? Mm-hmm. I think he had a mixture of curiosity, protector, as well as being compelled to do it. That gets out, I'm gonna protect us, I'm gonna protect my woman, I'm gonna protect my marriage, however he wants to do it. My lady, partner, I don't know. My partner.
Yeah.
I think there's that protector mode. I think there's a curiosity mode. And I think once he gets out of the car, then I think he's then further compelled to walk closer. And that's where they basically get it,
Which is something I don't think he normally would have done. He would have tried to keep his distance from whatever it was for him being pulled into. Yeah. So, I'm with. Did you, because I remember reading their story a long time ago. And I remember reading that I don't think they ever got visited by any strange agencies or anything, right?
Not that I was able to find, no.
What I do remember reading though is a lot of times they would leave and come home and their office had been rifled through or their papers had been strode all over the place. I don't know if you saw any of
that story.
I remember any of that anywhere.
I think that came from their niece. I think that's what I remember hearing her talk about. It's been a long time since I read that.
I don't think that was Betty and Barney. I think that was after Betty started doing conventions and giving talks.
Yeah, it was.
And I think it only happened once.
Yeah, it was a bunch of weird shit started happening. Yeah,
I watched a lot about. I watched a lot of interviews with Kathleen Martin. That is Betty and Barney's niece. And she's fascinating to listen to. I damn near reached out to her. I was like, hey, do you want to come on our podcast?
Do it, dude. That would be amazing to talk to her.
I really think that I'm going to at some point try and reach out to her to get her on. Because I know she just released or re-released, I cannot remember, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. It is a combination between her work and Stanton Friedman's work. That they put together, because what she's finding out, I went to her website that she has, and I was reading through a bunch of her files and everything, and she has actually started to break through some of the conspiracy aspect of it, of the cover-up portion. So she has basically the original testimony of what she knows from Betty and Barney Hill themselves, because she was around and young but old enough to understand what was happening during this time. And she has also found the disclosed paperwork of their interviews. And basically what happened is the story that she knows and what she was told with the details of the object zigzagging, bouncing back and forth, very ping pong like in the sky. When it comes to Project Blue Book's documentation on it, it basically says that didn't happen. It was a normal looking star-like light that just sat there. They erased all the movement out of the documentation from what she knows. And so she actually is putting together this book, captured the Betty and Barney Hill story with her and Stanton Friedman. And she's putting all that into this book, or she has put all of that into this book. The book, you can buy it. And she's showing how basically the cover-up has taken place. And she actually goes on. There's a movie that I was unaware that is going to be coming out about the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Oh, cool.
And she is actively trying so hard to get it to not take place.
Really?
Because she basically says that she's trying to find recourse through lawyers and stuff, because she wants to know how they're able to use the likeness and names of Betty and Barney Hill, like in these characters, so closely resembling
licensing.
Without approval from
the family,
because the family is absolutely like, hell no. because this movie apparently is going to go off of a toned down version of the story. And so Kathleen and the family are basically like, you're going to fuck it up again. Like, you're going to cause more confusion where there's confusion already. And it's going to have Demi Moore and who's the other one? I can't remember. I can't remember what it's going to be called either.
They might be able to do it based on the fact that they were a public news story, and that the fact that they are going off.
They are only able to do it because it is fiction.
I said, and don't think that's not intentional for them to continue to smear their name. Yeah. I mean, they're 110%.
But wait, we haven't seen the movie. We don't know if the goal is to smear their name or not. We don't know that. If it's a fictionalized account and they don't have permission, they could say fictionalized just so they can tell the story. This group of people may truly want to tell the story, but can't get permission. So we're saying it's a fictionalized version. But it could be following very closely. So we don't know if they're trying to smear their name. Let's
I'll reserve my opinion until I see it.
This is directly from her website. The recent announcement of a major motion picture based on skeptical podcasts featuring these false narrative propagandists is one of great concern to me as a major investigator on this case and the trustee of Betty Hill's estate. I am in possession of all the historical documents and the scientific analyses of the physical evidence that the false propagandists deny. I selected the files that are on display at certain collections and libraries. I am also the copyright owner with Friedman of Capture the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. The information in my book was vetted by such and such, such and such, such and such. The major motion picture will star Demi Moore and Coleman Domingo, 2 Oscar-nominated actors. Roger Ross Williams will direct this production by Seesaw Films. You might wonder how they can legally produce a major motion picture without violating my intellectual property rights. The reason is that they are producing a work of fiction using the names of real people. I object to their use of my family's names in their work of science fiction. I will obviously present a false narrative and will further confuse the public concerning the documented historical record and the scientific analyses of the evidence. This is clearly a reprehensible misrepresentation of the facts. That is directly.
She hasn't seen it. Yeah, so she's making an assumption they're going to do wrong by her family.
But she said it was based off of a podcast that talked about everything. If it's taking that slant,
but she's saying, that's what I'm saying. But this podcast is also taking that slant. So she's afraid it's just going to muddy the waters even more. I love listening to her talk. I think she's fantastic at what she's done. She has investigated this case for more than 40 years at this point. And what she has compiled together is fascinating on her website. But yeah, so there's a couple of things. If y'all are more interested in this case, you can watch the Alien Abduction Betty and Barney Hill documentary. You can get Capture the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. You can even go to Kathleen's website. She's probably the most knowledgeable, in my opinion, on this case. And I would love to try to reach out to her. So if this reaches you, Kathleen, I'm going to reach out to you and ask you to be on our podcast because I would love to interview you about your aunt and uncle. I think it would be fantastic.
Oh, that'd be fascinating. That'd be so freaking fascinating.
Yeah.
Hey, did you read, and Blake, I don't know, I know you didn't talk about it like in their abduction scenario. Did you read about the book that they handed her and then took it away from her?
Yes, I did. I did not include that. Yes, apparently apparently the entities handed her a book, and then as they were leaving off the ship, they were like, "Oh no, you can't have that." And
they said, "You can have this." Oh wait, no, you can't.
Yeah. So, I didn't include that aspect of it because I don't know. I only was able to.
It didn't advance the story.
It didn't advance the story, and I was only able to find it in like one source. So Anyways, so final thoughts: Betty and Barney Hill. Betty and Barney Hill case.
110% happened. I think that they had something happen to them that they could not explain. I mean, and look at the duress that they were both under, especially Barney trying to rationalize what happened to him. And also trying to rationalize that being under the public eye, from everyone, like getting all that scrutiny, not only because of the abduction, but also because of their relationship. And I think that drove that poor man into an early grave. I think that there is too much evidence that points to the fact that did happen to them. Like I said, the star map, the stains on the dress that was forensically analyzed, the similar but different experiences that they had, and consistently telling the same story for years and years and years. I absolutely think something like that happened to them. And it is interesting to me too, that how this set the template for everything after them as well.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for Betty having lost her husband early, but I think it was really cool that she went to the end of her life like wanting to tell her story and be involved in ufology.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Blake, final thoughts?
I would also have to say that for me, if you'd have asked me when we started this podcast, I'm not gonna lie, I used to have a hard time believing experiencers because I was not knowledgeable enough. I was still ignorant in the alien experiencer arena, I guess you could say, until after we had started this podcast and I had my own experience with an unidentified flying object pretty up close. Then I was like, oh shit. This 100% to me, I believe happened. There's too much consistency over decades, over like 6 decades worth of consistency. That's hard. If you're lying about something, you're going to slip in that time. Okay, maybe not 6 decades because she died in 2004. What, 4 decades?
Well, close.
Yeah. Neither she never slipped through her whole life. Barney didn't slip through his life. There's just too much consistency. There's too much that adds up when they're separated, when they're brought together. It just matches too much. But for me, the thing that gets me is the amount of tangible evidence in this case. And that's why I had to put in my conclusion what I put in. I don't think this case got a fair trial to begin with. And I don't think it's ever been given a fair trial, because how can we say that we can put away this person or do this? That's all the believable stuff for circumstantial evidence that is far less than what we have here. And yet you're saying that this can't take place. This can't happen, even though we've got ripped dresses, scuffed shoes, missing time, stopped watches, physical, psychological symptoms, circular circles on the back of a trunk that make us compass fit. We have all this stuff, and people are still saying that it couldn't have taken place. Why couldn't it have taken place? My favorite thing to ask is whenever I say, why couldn't it have taken place? Well, why not? No. I'm not the one that has to prove. You're the one telling me it could not have taken place. You tell me why it can't happen. I'm showing you all this evidence. Now you tell me why it couldn't have happened. So I 100% believe this story. I think this is a fantastic story. I'm glad I was the one that got to dive into it on here and laid claim to that. I had fun doing it, and I got to learn quite a bit more about Betty and Barney Hill. So 100% real.
Welcome to the fold, brother.
What about you?
So my final thought on this is, while there are a lot of skeptics, and while there are some that pull from different alien abduction stories and claim it as their own, and there is legitimate reason to be skeptical, what seals the deal for me on this, and I believe that Betty and Barney Hill experienced something that they could not explain, that they did not understand, the mental toll that it took on Barney, the matter-of-factness of Betty, who just wanted to explain it, understand it, and tell her story, not only for herself, but because Barney in his logical brain couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And while there's a lot of skepticism, and a lot of people go, oh, aliens, and they don't believe, go and sit, and this is going to upset me, go and sit in a room and listen to Travis Walton speak about his experience. Listen to the tapes of Barney Hill's hypnosis, and you tell me how these people can be lying about it. It will, again, I sat in a room and listened to Travis Walton speak. And my whole thought is, if one person steps to this man sideways, I will be going to jail, because I felt so protective that I was not going to let anyone disrespect him or hurt him. He came across as that credible, which is exactly how Betty and Barney come across in their interviews, in their regression tapes. And so I believe it happened. And if you talk to someone who's a legitimate experiencer, you'll be able to tell. You'll hear it in their voice. You'll see it in their eyes, because their eyes are haunted. And most of them are very reserved and careful about who they tell, because they know they'll be judged. Thank goodness Betty and Barney Hill decided to speak and give us the story. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
All right, sounds good. A few announcements here for you peeps. If you want to support the show directly, check out our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/EVP podcast. For just $5 a month, you'll unlock over 450 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcast, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast. So you are getting an additional hour with us each week. You're welcome. Your support from this goes directly back to the show and towards the adventures we bring you week after week. And if you are not sure about joining Patreon, try it risk-free with our 7-day free trial. Make sure you stay connected with us. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and many more by searching Everything Vaguely Paranormal and looking for that green sound wave. Remember, you can also catch us live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. So if you'd like to meet us in person, they're dwindling down. Not by much. You still got plenty of options. You can catch us at the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash from July 25th through the 27th, which is this weekend in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It is a paranormal weekend of events, guest speakers, and vendors that is taking place at the Eisenhower Hotel. Tickets are only available at the door. I will let you know that. Then we're off to the center of the country for KC Paracon on August 2nd in Kansas City. There will be celebrity speakers, vendors, and an investigation taking place. Tickets can be purchased at paraconkc.com. Then we're headed west September 3rd through the 6th to Vernal, Utah for Phenomicon 2025. This week will include some of the biggest names in the paranormal. Dave Schrader, Jack Osborne, Cindy Kaza, Amy Bruni. My God, I could go on and on. It is a week-long conference, and tickets can be purchased at phenomicon.net. September 27th, we will be in Independence, Missouri at the Masonic Temple with Epic VIP Events LLC with the Mysterious Mike and Sam for the Parathon with Johnny Hauser, Josh Hurd, Stephanie O'Reilly, and many more. That event is 18 and up only, though.
Yes.
Tickets for that can be purchased online at Eventbrite through the Mysterious Mike and Sam. And finally, we'll be attending the Rock Island Roadhouse Esoteric Expo on October 4th in Rock Island, Illinois. It is a weekend of speakers, psychics, mediums, metaphysics, and I hear the real Annabelle will be making her appearance there as well. Mm-hmm. So those tickets can be purchased through Extreme Ticketing. That's Extreme with an X, extremeticketing.com/Rock Island Roadhouse /tickets. Make sure you go subscribe to our Eventbrite page as well to be notified when public investigation tickets go on sale, because we do have a 2-night at Old Park in October, and the tickets for that are on sale. I don't think we're sold out. We'll see.
I'm getting close.
To make it easier, we have added all of these links to our link tree, which will be posted on the Everything Vaguely Paranormal Facebook and X profiles Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, or you can search linktr.ee/Everything Vaguely Paranormal. We are grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download keeps the adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with your friends. If you have a story, comment, or question, or you would like to be a guest on the show or have us as guests on your show, email us at the evppod@gmail.com. That's THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube channel. Please press that thumbs up button. Give us a like. Share it with your friends.
Absolutely. Well, thank y'all for joining us for another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am Blake Smith. My partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.